Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me, and especially to my patrons and channel members. I have a very special guest with me today. Joe Ensley has agreed to join me. Welcome, Joe.
Hey, good to be on your channel. Thanks for reaching out and having me on.
I do want to caution all of my audience. My usual audience is atheist, and you were well aware of that. And I really respect and appreciate your bravery in coming on the show. And I would ask my audience, you are welcome to challenge Joe's ideas all you want. You can challenge each other's ideas, but please be respectful of people. We're not going to deal with personal attacks.
You know, that's funny. And we'll see how you do. One of the funny things my fans have commented on is how harsh the atheists get in the comment section on these things. And I went on Bridging the Divide with J.L. Warren, and he had the most respectful audience. And they're actually nice to me and they liked both of our beards. They're really cool about that. Channel, so those comments get pretty raunchy pretty fast.
I've gone on Inspiring Philosophy a couple times and sent him some super chats just so that I could make sure that my question got addressed. Nice. But I look at it that, this is his channel. I'm not gonna be disrespectful. I'll ask a question, but that's all. Yeah. And Mark Caesar says, we're respectful here, Godless Granny. And he's right. Hey. Mark Caesar is right. Generally, most of the people here are very respectful.
Awesome.
Okay, getting into the topic. When we set up this stream, I told Joe to pick his favorite topic, that I would go with whatever he wanted to talk about. And Joe picked Perseverance of the Saints. So go ahead, Joe, and tell us what you mean by Perseverance of the Saints, and why do you think that this is a good defense for your faith?
I'm not sure that that doctrine is where I'd start with defending for my faith.
Okay.
But you reached out, you said that you had been a Christian, and now you weren't a Christian. And as someone who is more on the theology side of things, I thought that's not possible. And so and when you said pick your topic, I'm like, let's jump right onto that one. And so I know I haven't been able to watch a lot of stuff on your channel, but I know that you say that you were a Christian. Now you're not. And I would say that the biblical doctrine, many times people make the mistake of combining eternal security with Perseverance of the Saints. Those are two different doctrines.
Okay.
And so you have to divide those. But Perseverance of the Saints would be one where we'd say so when you're saved, eternal security means that Christ holds your salvation and he's not going to let you go. And we base this on no man can snatch you out of my hand. But then the perseverance side of that is going to be more like the human side, where we're going to see who the saints are by who perseveres. And so I would separate those two doctrines, and eternal security is something that God knows, and Perseverance of the Saints is something that we can witness.
Okay. So your position would be that either I was never a real believer, or if I was a real believer, that somehow God will bring me back to the fold.
Yes. Yeah, I would go on that line. Yep.
Okay. Okay. And do you have an opinion one way or the other as to which is the case for me, or not really?
If I had to pick, like I said, I haven't seen a lot of your stuff, but you seem very articulate in where you're at now. You seem very staunch in where you're at now. And I would put you in a Hebrews 6 category. So there's this section in Hebrews 6 where God talks about those who have tasted of these things and then fallen away. And then it's almost like they're going to a Romans 1 reprobation situation. And so in the parable of the sower, Jesus talks about the seed goes on the 4 types of ground, and there's one category of ground most people don't look at. There's a seed that sprang up, and it says that it had no root, and it had the appearance of life, but then later it withered. And I would put you in a Hebrews 6, the spring up, having an appearance of life, but not actually having a root, and then falling away. And so if I had to guess, now obviously I would probably agree with you that I can't know the state of your salvation. That is something that would be between a believer and God. But if I had to take a guess, I'd throw you towards that category if I had to place my chips.
Okay. If I told you, and this is true, this is not just a hypothetical, that I sincerely believed what I believed. Not only was I sincere in my belief, it was the major focus of my life. I not only went to church, I read my Bible, I taught it, I went on mission trips, I sang in the choir, I taught BS. I started a church library from scratch. I was a church treasurer. I held almost every position that I possibly could in a church. I could not be a pastor because I was female, and I could not be an adult Sunday school teacher because our church said females can't do that. But I did just about everything else that one could possibly do. And it wasn't just going through the motions. It wasn't, I was doing this because, I felt I had to do this to please God or anything like that. It was rather the opposite. It was, I love God so much that I want to do these things. And that was my life. And that's why it's so much of a focus of my life now, because it always was then. I just flipped which side I'm on. I didn't really flip the focus of my life. Knowing that, would you still say that you think that my spiritual life was rootless?
I'd have to ask a couple clarifying questions. So one of the
Okay.
things I'd like to know is, what denomination were you in?
Okay. That's a fair question. And the answer is many. Because when I was first married, my husband was active duty Army. So we moved a lot. I started in the Evangelical Free Church. I was a member of a couple of Southern Baptist churches. I was a member of an Evangelical Mennonite church, which is now Fellowship of Evangelical Churches. I was a member of a Congregational church, which was a Calvinist church. I have been a member of Presbyterian churches, which were also Calvinist churches. I've been a member of Independent Baptist churches. I think that about covers it. But those are the churches I've been members of.
You've kind of run in the conservative evangelical range.
Yes. I was very briefly in an Assemblies of God church, but I was never a member of that church. That didn't really appeal to me.
Okay. Yeah. SBC or independent to Assembly of God. That's going to be a sway and a miss. Yeah. So I would ask, before I answer my question, like I said, I'd like a few clarifying questions. My next clarifying question would be, what caused you to lose your faith?
Okay. If you would have asked me that question 4 years ago, I would have given you a different answer than I give you today. And that's because the straw that broke the camel's back was the most obvious part of it. But after I started listening to other people's deconversion stories, I realized that the cracks in my faith had been coming for the last decade before my deconversion. And those cracks didn't cause me to lose my faith, but it did cause me to start questioning.
Okay.
And the first crack came when 3 girls in my younger daughter's school all became pregnant. And they were going to a Baptist school. Now, 2 of the girls were expelled. The third one was fortunate enough to find out that she was pregnant during the summer break, so she simply withdrew, knowing that if she went back to school in the fall, she would have been expelled. And I started thinking about that. And I thought, these girls are all being expelled from school. And where are they going? To the public school.
Yeah.
Why can the public school forgive them, but the Baptist school cannot?
Okay.
That was the first crack. Now, that did not cause me to lose my faith, but that caused the first crack. The big one, the major fracture, came when I started reflecting on the life of the Apostle Paul. And through that reflection, I reasoned my way into the divine hiddenness problem. I started thinking about the fact that if God was capable of drawing all people to himself, and if God was capable of revealing himself to each person in a way that he or she would know him, then the fact that not everyone knows God has to be because God chooses not to draw them. God chooses not to reveal himself. Now, most people would say it's a matter of free will. If God, told everyone what they needed to know in order to come to believe, then there would be no free will choice. But I completely reject that argument.
It's a biblically illiterate option. If you're trying to do the Bible, that doesn't work.
Right. Because first of all, Paul, if God can appear to Paul, then God can appear to anyone he chooses to. And so if anyone does not know God and know exactly what they need to know God, it has to be by God's choice and God's choice alone. And that's when I moved to universalism. I figured that there was probably something there that I didn't know about. I figured that there was possibly a choice to be made after death, that after you die, that maybe God would reveal himself fully to everyone and give people the option of an informed choice. So that didn't last very long, because the next thing that happened was that I watched a video of Aaron Ra at the ARC protest. And in that video, he said, we know that the flood didn't happen. We know this through biology, geology, history, mythology. And as soon as he said history, I suddenly realized that he was right. And here's how I knew that, because no history course that I have ever taken has ever said, okay, and then all the people went extinct, and then 100 years later, the civilization began to rise again. There is no period in human history when the whole planet was extinct, except for 8 people in Babylon. Mm-hmm. And then for the next 100 years, there are no humans except in Babylon that would correspond to this flood. And because I had a literalist view of the Bible, that the flood literally happened, and that when the Bible says it was a global flood, that it was in fact a global flood, suddenly I could no longer believe the Bible. And now I'm going to take you all the way back to 1984.
Okay.
Because
a little time travel.
Yeah. In 1984, my husband and I lost our first baby.
Sorry.
And when that happened, I re-examined my faith. And I clung to my faith. I stayed with my faith for one reason and one reason alone. And that was, I said, the Bible is the bedrock of my faith. If the Bible is true, then Christianity is true. And come what may, I stay with God.
Okay.
But once it was proven to me that the Bible wasn't true, the foundation of my faith has now shattered, and it all collapsed like a house of cards.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. To answer your question, then, I would say you're on a really sped up version of the Matthew 7 people. So there's a bunch of people in Matthew 7 that meet the Lord and on the judgment, and they say, Lord, we were yours. We did all these things in your name. And Jesus says, depart from me, you workers of iniquity. I never knew you. And they are surprised to find out they're not saved. And I would say you're on like a streamlined express version of that, where you figured out that you weren't saved without having to get up to the judgment to do it. And your story actually represents the perfect storm of the 3 elements necessary to lose your faith. And if I can explain those, I preach about this all the time. So trifecta number 1, Christians have been bad and mean. And that represents a Christless Christianity. When you're in an organization that's built around, we've all got the same morals. We've all got the same values. We're all doing life the same way. We all agree on the same priorities. And then God is in the middle of that somehow. He's stirred in and he's spoken as the main ingredient, but he's actually not the main ingredient in most of those places. And so when you have a Christless Christianity, what happens is when those Christians fail, we find out that our faith was actually in the followers of Christ and not Christ himself. And so that's a shattering rock to our faith.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there.
Okay.
Because at no point in the story did I ever mention anything about Christians doing anything to me or failing me in any way.
No, they failed some teenage pregnant girls.
Ah, okay. That's what you mean. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Got you.
And so you never talked about asking whether or not God would forgive them. You talked about whether or not the Christians could forgive them. And the Christians failed miserably. They failed that test like wonkers. And then also you've got the devil tells 2 lies, and he told them in the garden. Number 1, he says, God's holding back something good from you. You should eat the fruit anyway, even though he said not to. God's holding back good. And the second lie he tells is, did God really say? Yeah, God's holding back good from you. And did he really say this wasn't going to be good? And so we watch those 2 things fall in succession. Why doesn't God save everyone? God's holding back something good from us. What are we talking about? And then we get into, there's no history in the flood. Did God really say? And so when you've got a Christless Christianity, and then that's followed by the impact of 2 lies of the devil being shown in my experience, like I can experience these things. All 5 of my senses are telling me this is true. Then yeah, we've got the perfect storm in the trifecta for losing a faith.
Okay. Do you think that there really was a global flood? Do you think that is literally true, or is that a figurative or a metaphor?
I'm not prepared to sit here and give a scientific discourse on the historicity of the global flood, but absolutely, okay. I believe that to be true. I found that science has changed a lot of things over the years. The original flat earthers were the scientists, and fortunately they seem to have gotten a little better over time. But I'm very much a presuppositionalist, and I find most of the theories that are presented as fact as completely not able to work with the argument for intelligibility or to show how life got here. So yes, I'm going to go with the global flood. Okay.
Are you a young earther?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh. Oh, that surprises me. That really surprises me. So
If you hold to the Bible correct, you are in this world long enough to know that anybody that's, yes, the Bible's the inerrant, infallible word of God. If they're not a young earther in a global flood, then they really don't. Maybe they're on that free will illiterate Bible side, but yeah, that's not working.
how do you explain history then?
How do I explain what history?
The history of humanity, that there's no period of 100 years when there's no humans on the face of the earth.
We actually do have that. In fact, the Bible is one of the few sources that is discredited more quickly than other sources with less the authenticity. We'll go back to Pliny the Younger and we'll take his advice on, yeah, we think Pompeii happened and one guy talked about it. And then we'll go back and we'll look at biblical records and we've got tons of witnesses and different people saying it and these things showing up. And then we're like, nah, but the Bible's not right because that's religion.
Okay, now Pompeii, I've been to Pompeii.
Okay.
I have seen the charred remains that are still on display there.
Okay.
The evidence for Pompeii is sitting right there for people to look at.
You could go to Jerusalem too.
I've been to Jerusalem.
Okay. And the evidence for Christianity and what happened in the life of Jesus is all right there.
No, it's not. You go to the alleged Garden of Gethsemane, and the guide will tell you, we think this might have been the Garden of Gethsemane. Okay. And then you go to the Church of the Nativity, and they say, we think this might have been where Jesus was born. And then they show you a tomb, and you say, Jesus was buried in a tomb kind of like this one, but we don't know where. There's no actual evidence. There's just a bunch of guesswork.
I think we've got lots of historical markers, and you've got the Bible Museum in DC. We've got plenty of markers that tell us, hey, yeah, this guy was around. We've got tons of historical documents. We've got the works of Flavius Josephus, who aren't really contested on any other area of history that he talks about. We've got plenty of evidence for Christianity, especially revolving around the historicity of Jesus, the life and death of Christ, and plenty of secular sources too. Like the same guy that told us Pompeii that you can verify with the witness, that same guy's talking about the life and death of Jesus.
I'll grant you that Jesus probably lived, and I'll grant you that Jesus definitely died.
Okay.
But that's it.
Okay.
And I think that's all the historical sources will give you, is that he lived and he died.
Okay.
So that doesn't give you Christianity. That gives you a dead Jesus.
It doesn't give you a dead Jesus because they haven't found his grave yet. So I don't think that quite gives it to us.
Okay. If Jesus is still alive today, can you produce him?
Okay, I can't produce him physically. But,
okay.
But getting back to how we're dealing with history and how we're looking at that, what I've noticed is that a lot of times in the scientific community that is not Christian, obviously there's plenty of Christian scientists that are creationists. You take your Henry Morrises and those kind of guys. But when we look at science, they're very particular about what evidence they want to look at. So when you're looking at, okay, deciding whether the earth is old or not, and how old is the earth? And so we'll take our dating rates and we'll say, this is how we can know something is that old. And you can take the path of the moon and the magnetic field of the earth, and you can look at the decay rate of those things. And the decay rate of the magnetic field of the earth and the rotation of the moon around the earth is not going to hold up to billions of years at the current decay rate. And so science is going to assume this is the current decay rate. So it must have been the decay rate millions of years ago. And then that's how they're going to date the earth. But they're actually going to selectively pick their data on that. And when it comes to things like magnetic fields and the moon rotation, they're like, no. And when actually creation would be a more plausible explanation for those sorts of things.
All right. I don't want to go that direction just because science is not my forte. And as you said, it isn't really yours either. Yeah. But I really would like to get back to the history thing, because when I asked you about history, you gave me Jesus, which wasn't what I was talking about at all. Okay. I was asking you about the alleged flood. You study Chinese history. There's no 100-year gap in Chinese history where there are no people in China. Okay. Study Egyptian history. There's no 100-year gap when there's no people in Egypt. In fact, we've got records of who was Pharaoh at the time when the Egyptians are supposed to all be dead by the alleged flood. We've got the Egyptians still building pyramids all through this period of this alleged flood. There were people in India. There were people in South America. No matter where you go on the face of the earth, you can find archaeological evidence of people existing all through the time of this alleged flood. How do you explain that away?
You have plenty of evidence for looking at the process of the flood. We've got fossils on tops of mountains. We've got a lot of things that could only be true if that flood actually happened.
That's not true at all. Tectonic plates are how fossils got on top of mountains. When the tectonic plates get pushed up, the mountain goes up, and whatever is on top of the seabed, which is the, the marine life, they get pushed up to the top of the mountain with the tectonic plate.
Okay. I like I said, I didn't come here prepared to argue for the global flood, so I don't have the evidence in front of me.
Okay, let's switch topics.
Okay.
I believe you're a Calvinist. Is that correct?
No.
Oh, okay.
People like to apply that label. That label is for people that don't understand church history. So if we'd like to say this, that John Calvin articulated the same things that Paul and Jesus in the early church believed when he fought the heresies of Jacobius Arminius with the Synod of Dort. If that's what we mean by Calvinism and articulation of the biblical truth, then sure, Calvin and I would agree on a lot of things. I would call myself Reformed, which means I'm going to hold the biblical thing. But Calvinist would be someone that follows Jesus, follows John Calvin, or believes Calvin because of what Calvin says, and that is not my situation at all.
Okay. I guess I should clarify. What I really meant to ask is, you believe that who is a believer and who is not believer is the sovereign choice of God, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, that'd be one of my main arguments with the perseverance of the saints argument, is that belief is not the choice of man, it's the choice of God. Okay.
If belief is not a choice of man, it is a choice of God, why do you do what you do?
Because my heart gave me the faith.
Okay, but you're never going to convince someone to believe in God, because only God can do that. So what is the purpose of telling people about God if the only way they can come to believe is if God chooses to come and move them?
Because any kind of evangelistic efforts, I have a 100% success rate for the kingdom of God. So either it is going to add to the condemnation of vessels prepared for wrath, for destruction, that God will use to glorify himself. So it will be adding to the condemnation of unbelievers, where God will be just in destroying them for eternity. Or he will use the preaching of the gospel in the way he primarily has, which is how he draws his elect to himself. So I have a 100% success rate with whatever I'm doing, because I'm accomplishing God's purpose either way.
You could also look at it and say you have a 0% success rate, because anyone that comes to God was predestined to do so before you even existed, and what you had to do had nothing to do with it.
Yes, God doesn't need me to do what he's going to do. It is a privilege and an honor to be used by the sovereign God to accomplish his purposes. I think the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. You and I are both very religious for what we do. We just are on opposite sides, and we have different religions. And so
I would agree that we are very, I don't like to use the word religious, but we are both enthusiastic about what we do, and we are on opposite sides. I would agree with that much of it.
Sure.
I would not agree that what I do is a religion.
Oh, sure. Both atheists don't like that word, but it does describe this level of worship and preeminence over a certain ideology over others. It's very similar to religion, even if you don't want to put it there.
Except I don't worship anything.
You do. You've placed yourself in the judge seat over God, and you worship yourself in righteousness over God.
What do you see as worship?
Worship is the adoration, the preeminence of something, the serving of something above other things.
Do you think that I adore myself?
Only in relationship to how you see God, because you see God as beneath you.
I don't see God at all.
Right.
I don't see God beneath me. I don't see God above me. I don't see God beside me. I don't see God at all.
Put yourself in the judgment seat. You have made yourself the judge over God, and you have declared that he does not exist. And so now you are above him.
But aren't we called to do that? Aren't we called to do that?
I don't understand who does the calling in the atheist worldview, so you're going to have to...
I'm not... Okay, I should say, aren't Christians called to do that? When I believe it's in 1 John that says that we are to test the spirits and to see if they are from God. If we are to test and find out if something is from God, does that not, direct us to test God and to judge God? Did God really do this?
Well, I test the spirit to see if it comes from God, and I test the spirit of God, and I decide that it hasn't come from God. Then all I've done is proven that I am not an infallible resource for other people to base their judgments on. Clearly, I've missed the mark, because if I'm to test the spirit to see if it comes from God, and I come away from that arguing that there is no God, clearly my testing of the spirits was done very improperly. That's like me saying, hey, I want you to test that chair you're sitting in. I want you to make sure that it came from the manufacturer that it says. And you come back and you say, I've decided that the chair doesn't exist. You actually didn't do it right. We never determined the manufacturer, and saying the manufacturer doesn't exist doesn't make my problem go away. That's just where we're at. Oh, I love your super chat. Absolutely, God adores himself. God is the only one worthy of adoration and worship. So yes. And if you want to see my video on Is God a Narcissist, I've dealt with this with Godless Engineer and JL and all that. But yes, God adores himself. He's the only being worth adoration. So yes.
If you found out that God chose not to save one or more of your children,
Okay.
how would you feel about that?
Means he's God. See, God is a bigger being than I am. He's higher than I am. And I sure hope that God has chosen my children. And one of the assurances that I have that he most likely has is that he's placed them in my household to be raised under his admonition and nurture. But if God chooses not to save my children, that is his prerogative, because he is God and I am not God. He decides who's in his heaven. He decides who's in his hell. Romans 9 is really clear about how God handles that. And because he's God and I'm not, I don't get to sit over him in judgment of that decision. That's his decision to make, not mine.
So it's not only possible, but it's also very likely, because the way is narrow and those that are chosen are few.
Yes.
It is very likely that at least one of your children is not among the chosen.
That is possible, yes.
And it is very likely that God predestined one of your children to an eternal torment in hell.
That is possible.
And you don't have a problem with that.
Okay. We've got two ways to look at this. This is a glass half full or glass empty. Either I can rejoice that God chose a wretched sinner for salvation, which is me, or I can worry about God's choices with other wretched sinners. When I realize that the human nature and the human position against God is that I've sinned against an almighty God and that everyone deserves his judgment, I should be mystified, shocked, and stunned whenever he chooses anyone, not surprised when someone doesn't get chosen.
Okay. First, let's get to Ox's question. What kind of beard oil do you use?
I home make my own beard oil at this point. I use whiskey as my base, and then I have a couple different oils that I add to that and mix it together. But yes, I make my own.
Okay, very good. Okay, going back. All right.
You do have a nice audience, by the way. These are good people here.
Unfortunately, I'm concentrating more on our conversation and I'm not reading all of the chat. I'm picking up all of the super chats and I'm trying to read the others. But if they're more than 2 lines long, I can't go back and forth fast enough. So if you've had a really good question or comment that I've missed, I apologize for that, but I can't keep up with both at the same time. Okay, the question I have for you is whether or not a person is saved was determined before the world even existed, correct?
According to Ephesians and 1 Peter, yeah.
Okay. So whether or not your children are saved is a decision that God made even before the earth existed. You know, you didn't exist. No one existed. Okay. So when your child was born, the day he was born, before he did anything good or bad, God already decided he's an Esau that I love, or he's a Jacob that I love, or he's an Esau that I hate. Correct? Yeah. Okay. So if a baby is born and it's an Esau baby, it dies and it goes straight to hell. Not because it sinned, but because that was God's sovereign choice, correct?
Also because God explains why man is responsible for his sin and being born with a sin nature, because we're represented by Adam in the fall. But yes, that is the truth.
Okay. So it's not any particular person's sin that subjects them to judgment, but rather it was the sin of Adam that brought judgment on the entire human race. And judgment isn't just. Judgment is, you know, everyone is under this punishment, whether they were good or not.
But see, again, what we're doing is you're putting yourself in the judge's chair. You got to realize that God is bigger than us, and God is just. He will make no decision that is unjust or unmoral. God is, all these things are going to come from God. So if he's made that decision, he made the right decision.
Okay, let's go to Adam.
Okay. So
God knew
let me explain Adam really quickly on that one, because we were talking about the justness. And I think J.C. Ryle was the one that said, you don't have to like the way God governs his universe, but until you get to tell him what to do, you have to have your own universe. And since you don't have your own universe, we have to deal with God's universe. And so since it's his universe, he set up the rules, he did his way. And he decided that Adam represented us as our federal head. And when Adam chose to sin, all of humanity was represented in that fall and bears responsibility for it. But we're also doing a big...
That also contradicts other things in the Bible.
And that's why I want to talk about the mistake we're making here. We're smashing together the levels of where God's at and where we're not, where we're at. So it's like I like Doug Wilson's question. When Hamlet says to be or not to be, who's speaking, Hamlet or Shakespeare? And the answer is, it depends on how I'm looking at the play. On one level, Shakespeare wrote the play. On a whole nother level, Hamlet is being a character and he's making his decisions and doing what he's doing. And I think a lot like the mathematical idea of flatland, where you would have a two-dimensional world and you could not explain to people in a two-dimensional world what it would be like to be in a three-dimensional world. Much like that, we arrogantly assume that we're in the three-dimensional world and we can decide what it's like, when really we're the flatlanders. God has dimensions outside of time that he understands that we do not understand. And so it's very arrogant for me to assume that I can make a judgment on how God has operated his universe when, oh, sorry, saw our chat. Arrogant of me to decide how God makes his universe when I'm not the one who made the universe and he gets to decide.
And how do you know that you have the right one? Maybe, that's why I brought this comment up. Maybe you have the wrong religion. Maybe you're worshiping the wrong God and the real God is angry with you.
All religions have the same essential problem they have to deal with. They have to deal with one fact. What do I do with Jesus? And so when you're evaluating world religions, you have to deal with the fact Buddha never claimed to be God. Muhammad never claimed to be God. You've got lots of people that claim to be teachers of God or prophets of God, but you've never had a man alive that had so much impact in history, who did so many documented things and claimed to be God.
So I don't accept that Jesus ever claimed to be God.
Oh, okay. In his writings, he said he did. We could go.
Well, Jesus never wrote anything. If Jesus had written something and had said, I am God, then I would agree with you. But Jesus never wrote anything.
So the eyewitness accounts aren't good enough for you?
There are no eyewitness accounts.
So the 12 disciples that were with him who said this is what he said, that's not good enough?
None of them wrote anything.
Yeah, lots of them wrote things. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. You've forgotten a lot, man.
Okay.
We got eyewitness accounts of this guy.
Okay, the problem is that
we
don't know who wrote the Gospels.
On trial for claiming to be God and King.
We have no idea who wrote these Gospels. The Apostle Matthew did not write the Gospel of Matthew. That is the scholarly consensus, is that we don't know who wrote these Gospels.
It's not the scholarly consensus at all. And that's why I say
it most definitely is.
The atheists do is they're very particular about what evidence they want to take and what they don't want to take. And so they're not.
I'm looking at the textual critics. I grant you, I'm not looking at the believers who start from the position that this is true and therefore we have to believe it. And because we've already decided that it's true, then therefore it's true. Yeah, that's circular reasoning. I'm looking at the textual critics.
Even secular guys like Jordan Peterson talks about how incredible the Bible is because of how it was written with so many different authors over the continents and the continuity of the thing. It's one of the first books that we had put together.
It doesn't even have continuity with itself. Take the pastoral letters.
Okay.
Titus and 1st and 2nd Timothy claim to be written by Paul, and yet they're forgeries. And the textual critics will tell you that they are forgeries because, first of all, they disagree with what Paul says in the authentic writings of Paul, like 1 Corinthians. Paul really felt that the end times were going to come during his lifetime. And that's why he called Jesus the first fruits of the resurrection, because he was expecting, this is the first of the resurrection and the rest are going to come just any day now. And this is why Paul was adamant that people should remain single, because he didn't think there was any time for marriage. The world was going to end during his lifetime. And yet in the pastoral letters, which likely were written 15 years after Paul's death, according to the textual critics, they're saying, that a pastor has to be a married person. That's completely contrary to what Paul had to say.
Okay. All right. How can you prove that Charles Darwin wrote his book on Darwinism?
Why would I need to do that?
Because the atheist applies a double standard, one to the Christians and one to himself. And you'll have no way to prove that your things are true. And yet you'll take a magnifying glass and look at we've got unnamed.
Okay. The answer to your question is the way we can prove that Darwin in fact wrote that is because there were plenty of people who published it at the time that he wrote it. There were people who talked to him and discussed the book with him at the time that he wrote that. There are lots of contemporary writings about his book, and all of them talking about him having written it. But even if it wasn't Darwin that wrote it, suppose Darwin put his name on it and somebody else wrote it, I would not have a problem with that because I'm not trying to live as if everything in that book is true. In fact, there's a lot of things that Darwin wrote that we've since discovered are not true. We've had to refine his ideas some. But when I look at the textual critics, Bart Ehrman for one, and he's not alone. I even saw the other day, I was looking, Jonathan McLatchie acknowledges that the consensus of the textual critics is that the pastoral letters are forgeries. Now,
Yeah.
he himself doesn't believe that,
Right.
but he acknowledges that is the consensus.
Yes, there's plenty of textual critics out there, and many of them do say things a lot like that. However, we also have eyewitness accounts of the people. We have contemporaries. We have other publications. All the proofs that you could provide for Darwin writing his book are the same proofs that we could provide for all the books of the Bible. We have
That's
those.
not true.
How so? So we do not have
Okay.
contemporaries of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. No one else was alive in the world at that time. They weren't circulated amongst the churches, and the other churches didn't verify these things.
No, they didn't. That's exactly it. First of all, we have no original texts from any of those gospels. The oldest thing we have is a fragment of John that is, I can't remember exactly how late it was. I believe it's about 100 years after it was written. Darwin, we've got the original manuscripts.
It depends on if you're going down a Byzantine or a Masoretic text, but they have lots of the original texts of these things. And they have certainly enough of the copies certain around that were made. And
there are lots of copies, but no, there is not a single original, even fragment of any manuscripts from the New Testament. Not a single one.
Yeah, there absolutely are. Yeah, there absolutely are.
Find evidence for it, because I'm sure all of the people who study it would love to find these, because they just don't exist.
You're the first person I've ever heard to claim that they don't exist. I've been
original manuscripts.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm Googling it right now. Original.
But we also have the writings of Clement Alexandria. We have the churches these were circulated amongst too. We can prove that the guy that was messengering Tychicus, that was messengering for Paul on his missionary journeys, he did visit these churches, and they talked about his visit, bringing a letter of Paul to them. And then they copied those letters and they circulated around them.
Okay. Here we are. The oldest biblical text. It is the Rylands Library Papyrus P52, which may be as early as the first half of the 2nd century. That obviously is not an original manuscript, unless you're going to claim that John was written in the first half of the 2nd century and John was still alive in the 2nd century. Is that your claim?
No. I'd have to go look up the resource that you're looking at.
Okay, this is actually Wikipedia, and I'm looking for a different source. Let's see. Here we go. Blue Letter Bible. Come on, why won't you open? All right, my computer does not want to open that. Why not? Let's refresh. Here we go. There it is. Okay. Let me put that on the share screen. Okay, you can see it now. The oldest New Testament manuscript that still exists, P52, as far as the New Testament is concerned, the oldest manuscript whose date is unquestioned is the John Reynolds fragment. It is called P52. This means that the 52nd papyrus document of the New Testament that was cataloged. Okay, it's 6 centimeters by 8.9 centimeters. It contains John 18:31 through 34. And let's see. Can I find anything that tells you what the date is on this? There we go. Comes from, oh no, yeah, that's something else. But that's it. Yeah, that's the oldest piece we've got, is this one. We don't have any original manuscripts.
Okay, yeah, looks like you're right. But we have enough eyewitness accounts, and we have those things circulated by people and other times that talked about them. There's a reason they were copied so much, and we even have any of the manuscripts sitting around.
Oh, this is interesting. P52 is in Manchester, UK.
What do you know?
Okay, so what we've got is that the oldest complete copy is about 300 years removed from when it was written.
Okay.
And now, one thing we do have, and I will grant you this, is we have lots of copies, most of which were made in the Middle Ages. And when the textual critics compare the copies, there are lots of variations between the copies. And when the critics compare the copies and they see differences in the text, they will rate each difference A, B, C, or D as to their confidence level as to whether what they are translating it as or what they've chosen is the correct word is really in fact the correct word. A being high confidence because it appears in a number of different manuscripts, and D being low confidence because it doesn't appear in very many manuscripts. But when you've got this 100-year gap between the time when the originals were written and before even the earliest pieces that we have, we really can't have confidence that what is in our New Testament is even what was written originally. And then on top of that, we have a gap of about 20 to 40 years between the time that Jesus died and the time that any of this was even begun to be written down. And so we've got an oral tradition.
Pieces were written down.
I'm sorry, what?
Any surviving pieces were written down.
Oh, no, it's worse than that. Because Jesus died in approximately 33 AD, correct? 33 CE,
Yeah.
correct? Okay.
Yep.
And the first gospel to be penned was the Gospel of Mark, which most people agree was not written until about 50 or 60 CE.
Okay.
20 to 40 years after Jesus died.
Okay.
So it was penned based on an oral tradition.
Right. We also have the writings of Paul talking about Jesus and Christianity. And those,
Granted.
The fact that Paul is writing stuff is really not debated in any serious scholarship. And he's in AD 50, 60.
True, but Paul doesn't say anything about the life of Jesus. Paul never mentions that Jesus was resurrected.
He definitely talks about the resurrected Savior. Absolutely.
Right. He talks about how he saw a vision of a resurrected Jesus.
Okay.
And he talks a lot about his vision, and he's explicit that he got what he learned not from the apostles, but from his visions. And so what we're getting from Paul is what he saw in a vision. He never met Jesus.
Okay. You've also got Flavius Josephus. He's pretty hard to knock down. He's a pretty well-respected Hebrew scholar. And
all he says about Jesus is that he died. He was crucified. That's it.
Oh, he says a lot more than that. In fact, I think what he says, that he drew many of the Jews to him and many of the Gentiles. He was the Christ, and Pilate crucified him because
the part where he says he was the Christ is a very disputed text. Most scholars agree that one is not, that was not authentic.
Okay. So you don't like the Bible, and you don't want to believe the Bible, and the sources that you choose to read say that the Bible is not reliable. Hooray.
Okay. I do want to revisit one small thing, and it's just a word of caution that I wish to give to you. And that is, don't let your children ever see this stream.
Okay.
Don't let your children ever know that you're okay with them being tortured for eternity.
Okay. And why is that?
Because I think it would be emotionally damaging to them. Wouldn't you feel hurt knowing that your parents are okay with you being tortured? Don't you think that would be very hurtful to them?
I think it depends on your understanding of God and your bigness of God. And I think that God, being an intelligent designer of the universe and having the right to do with his creation as he will, makes a lot more sense than an atheist worldview.
This has nothing to do with God. This has to do with your relationship with your children and how your children feel about how, are you a loving and protecting parent? If you as a parent feel that you would hand your child over to someone to be tortured, that's going to make your children feel
Oh, but
very
this is a
emotionally
question of
unstable.
this is a question of who I trust more. Now, am I okay if some person on the horizontal level wants to mess with my kids? Absolutely no. But on the vertical level, am I okay with God doing with his creation as he pleases? I 100% am. And why do you think I would evangelize my children and tell them the good news of the gospel, hoping that God would draw them to himself and they'd be elect? Like I said, we're combining the two levels of God's sovereignty and trying to make them even, and that doesn't really work because God is sovereign and man has responsibility. Both of those things can be true at the same time. But also, I need to provide them with a worldview that provides an intelligent basis for things like logic and reasonable thought and giving them some sort of order to their world. And in an atheist worldview,
I don't think telling your children that they are garbage, that they are worthless, that they are deserving of nothing but torture and death is good for them. I think
and
that is
yet,
very
and yet that
damaging.
is what the atheists purport. So how is that any better than what we say?
Is it an atheist position that children should be tortured? Where in the atheist view is there a torture chamber for children?
So Richard Dawkins says there is no such thing as good or bad, just blind, pitiless indifference. There's absolutely no moral code that can be founded upon in the atheist worldview. There are no morals.
I
There is no
disagree
right
with
and
you
wrong.
there. I disagree with you there.
Excellent. All right. How do you know what is right and wrong in an atheist worldview? Where do you determine objective morality?
Okay, you've asked several very different questions there. How
Okay.
do I know what is right and wrong? I draw what is right, what I find to be right and wrong by my experience, by the experience of others, by what I read from what other people say, just drawn on the totality of human experience that is available to me. Some of it is instinctual. So not all of it is learned. Some of it is instinctual, and that which is instinctual is learned evolutionarily. And by that I mean that humans do certain things to bring about the survival of the species. You will see a person that will self-sacrifice to bring about the survival of their own children. That is a way of bringing perpetuation of the species by allowing your genes to be passed on to your children. And species survival is something that we see in pretty much every living organism. Doing what is best for our own survival or what is best for the survival of our species is something that all living organisms do. And so there is some morality that is tied to that as well. Not all of it, but some
So
of it.
all we need to do is change the parameters of your paradigm, make you a Nazi and have your children be not of the right German heritage, and then have your experience tell you that torturing and killing these children is going to the best thing for survival of the species. And wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. It's good to torture kids again in your worldview.
No, you're wrong.
Okay.
It
How?
is entirely possible for people to be wrong and for an entire group of people to be wrong about what is moral and what is immoral.
Okay.
And whenever that happens, there is eventually going to be a correction. And this has happened many times throughout human
So
history.
it's okay for them to
Not,
be tortured under the Nazi regime as long as
no, it
it's
is
corrected
not.
later?
It is not.
Then how do we know that's wrong? How do we know that it would be wrong for the Nazis?
Because that is not right. That is not promoting the well-being of the members of the group. It's not promoting the well-being of the species.
The Germans certainly believed it was promoting the well-being of the species.
And they were wrong because it didn't. It was killing people. It was hurting people.
Who gets
The
to
only way
determine
that
whether it's wrong or not?
okay, the only way that they were able to come to that conclusion was by redefining humans to not include Jewish people.
Okay.
And if you exclude some people from the definition of human, then obviously you are wrong because you're not doing what is best for people by deciding that only certain people get to be people.
Oh, that's going to work real well until I bring up abortion. Because atheists,
I knew you were going to go there.
yeah, atheists love to redefine those as not deserving of life either. And yet that's not considered wrong. That's considered right. In this worldview, it leads us to a subjective morality that is based on our experiences and our feelings. Like you
and
told
I
me.
will grant you that. I do think morality does have it is subjective. And that's why I said you've asked several questions there, because one of your questions was, how do you get to an objective morality? And I don't.
Right.
I think morality is subjective, and I think it is something that humans keep figuring out as we go along. 2,000 years ago, we thought that gladiator games were more morally acceptable, and now we find that reprehensible.
But see, the Christians never did. The Christians have had God's moral code. God's moral code hasn't changed.
Oh, that is so not true.
Oh,
The next example I was going to go to was slavery. And
okay.
Christians most definitely were okay with slavery.
What
Now,
kind
I'll
of
grant
slavery?
you that some of them were not.
What kind
But
of slavery?
okay,
Because
well,
if you're going to compare what happens in the New Testament and the slavery that happens in Christian households, where you have Christians buying people from slavery to evangelize them and make them part of their families, that's not the type of slavery.
no, I'm thinking about the slavery that we had right here in the United States and all of the Christian pastors that insisted that it was the God-given right of the slave owner to own Black people as slaves, because God said in Genesis that cursed be Ham and the descendants of Ham were the Black people. This was the logic that they used
Sure.
to.
There was a tiny minority, but then William Wilberforce used the Bible to prove that slavery was wrong objectively with God. And later on, when we needed more civil rights reform,
This was not a tiny minority. The vast majority of slaveholders in the South were Christians.
Yeah, and the people that fought against it were Christians too. Abraham Lincoln was drawing on biblical principles to show that every human has the same God-given rights. William Wilberforce used the Bible to show that slavery was wrong. And later on, when we needed more civil rights reformed, we have a Christian guy coming along, Martin Luther King Jr., that also is using the Bible to show us that we're wrong. The God's morality hasn't changed. How some people understood it has changed, but God's morality never changed.
Okay, if God actually thought that this was wrong, why did he never say so?
Oh, he 100% fixes all the slavery issues if you read through your New Testament. When God talks about how the people are to treat their slaves, how they're to handle slaves, how they're
But
supposed to
that's
handle
not saying
look
that
at-
people shouldn't have slaves.
You look at the year of Jubilee, but see, slave doesn't always mean cotton picking, getting whipped in a field. In those days, there was indentured servants, there was a type of apprenticeships. Those are all getting lumped under the category of slavery. And so the way God does
But God most definitely permitted chattel slavery in the Old Testament. He said that they could buy and sell slaves from the foreigners. He directs them to go into foreign countries and take people as slaves. And he says that they can keep them as slaves for life and pass them down as an inheritance to their children.
Yes, but the kind of slavery we're talking about is a little different. Also, you've got
No, it's not different. If a person is captured as a slave, as a prize of war, and passed down to your child, and their children are perpetual slaves, which it also says, the children of a female slave are slaves. That is chattel slavery. That is owning another person, and I consider that immoral. And obviously you do not.
God's permitting some of these things. God permits a lot of things. God's permitting you and me both to keep drawing breath, even though we're sinful creatures. But when you look at the cultural context of the time and how God is creating a power balance between men and women and allowing for the protection of people that have been taken over by foreign nations, we don't understand what it's like to live in a time when the tribes are fighting. But then when you took on a slave, it didn't mean the same thing that we think of when a slave. These people became household
So
members.
obviously it's not an absolute, it's not an objective morality. It's a morality that changes because God permitted it at that time, but now he's not permitting it. His moral position has changed.
I don't think his moral position has changed. I think the context of what he was permitting has changed. I think the context of slavery today is different than the context of slavery then. And then it was within God's moral code to permit it. And right now it's not because of how we treat slaves and what our idea of slavery is. But God says he is a God that doesn't change. And that's the only person you can trust with your actual objective morality.
Yeah. We're never going to get anywhere here, but that's all right because we're almost out of time. And so I'm going to give you a chance to talk a little bit about what's on your channel and a little bit to sum up your position, and go ahead and take it away, and just anything that you didn't get a chance to say that you'd like to say.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me on your channel. The whole reason that I do that is because I have been saved by my sins by the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. I've been made a new creature, and there is freedom from sin and slavery of sin. And I want to make sure that everybody knows the good news that Christ died for sinners. And so when I look at trying to develop an intelligible, orderly worldview, what I have found is that Christianity best accounts for the data that we have available to us with intelligent design and the evidence of design all around us pointing us to God. And so I am a Christian pastor. My channel is all about teaching Christians how to live the Christian life, how to follow Christ, how to follow the Bible, how to have freedom from sin, and how to have eternal life in heaven. So that's why I do what I do. That's what my channel is here for. The whole reason I come on these shows to do this is to promote the good news of Jesus Christ and how he died for sinners. I have zero hope that usually that the person I am debating with is going to actually listen to me. But there are a lot of people watching this. There will be young people that might be considering deconstructing their faith. There will be other atheists out there that maybe have not been so hardened and deceived yet. And I want to let them know that, hey, there is a life in Christ available. I can personally testify to it. God has blessed me and my family greatly, and we follow his way. And I want to share that with others.
Okay. I think I would like to push back on just one thing that you said. You know, when you debate someone, you say you don't expect your opponent to listen to what you say. I would expect them to listen. I wouldn't necessarily expect them to agree. I wouldn't necessarily expect them to accept what I had to say, but I definitely would expect them to listen. And correct me if I'm wrong, but have I not listened to you?
When we talk about listening to each other, it depends on what level of listening. We're here to kind of have a clash of worldviews. And so we're listening to point out holes in each other's arguments. We're not listening to each other as people. Now, you and I actually have done a little bit of that, which I would say is kind of abnormal. You actually shared your story of the faith, and we were able to talk about that a little bit. That's pretty rare. And most of the time, it's a battle of he said, she said, my source, your source. So there is a hearing that happens to debate, but not an actual listening. But
okay. That's fair.
You've been a nice exception to that. We've had listening, which has been good.
Yeah, I sometimes think that debates are not of a lot of value because nothing ever really gets resolved during the debate. Although I saw one debate that I really thought was well worth it quite recently. It was between Michael Jones, Inspiring Philosophy, and a Muslim man. And the Muslim man was trying to make a case for child marriage. And Michael Jones just mopped the floor with him. And it was a good debate because he pointed out at the end of the debate that the Muslim man was okay with a man marrying a 3-year-old and raping the 3-year-old. Yeah. And yeah, it got really bad. Actually, oops, sorry, I'm trying to get that super chat and I accidentally clicked the wrong thing. Fun stories, but still the same old Christian crap.
It doesn't change. That was kind of my whole argument. So
yeah. Okay, coming up on my channel, I've just released a video addressing the infighting in the Southern Baptist Convention. And you got to watch that one all the way to the end because I do a law commercial parody at the end of that one.
See, we can have a good video about how the SBC is completely full of nonsense. We should have started there. We would have agreed.
Next week on my channel, my guest will be Carlana. Carlana was on a year or so ago and wanted to defend her Catholicism with her son. This time she wants to come back and say why she thinks Satan is influencing our culture and is causing people to be homosexual and transgender. I have asked her not to bring her son on because if we're going to be discussing sexual topics, I'd rather not do that with a minor. And she's agreed she's going to bring her husband instead of her son this time. And that one should be a fun one, talking about why she thinks Satan is causing people to have a particular sexual orientation. But anyway, so that's what's coming up next week. Thank you, Joe, for coming. It has been a pleasure having you. And as I said, I think you are brave for coming on here. As you saw from the chat, you are in the extreme minority here. And so
I actually can't see the chat. All I have is the link for this. So I will have to go look at the chats later. I can't.
Don't you have a box that says private chat and comments?
Oh, I never switched over to comments. Ha, there we are.
Now you know for next time.
What do you know?
Right. Okay. Thank you all for being in the chat. And I'm sorry I did not pay a whole lot of attention to your comments today. I've been really busy and I haven't been able to get to all of them. But thank you all of you for coming and for your comments. And thank you to all of you who watch this in the future. Live your life.
Hey, see ya.